A pleasure to meet all at last, and here we are at it once again with some more TV shows that deserve the spotlight. So in this particular instance, I'd say it's time that we once again look to the 1990s. Because with the last show I talked about, we ended up going pretty far back into the past, known as Rin Tin Tin. And then with another one that's not quite as old, Hanna-Barbera's Godzilla. So I guess with the time, we're going to go back to the 90s again. This time, I want to be talking a bit about Lloyd Kaufman's The Toxic Avenger, a 1980 film which circumnavigates a young Melvin whom is seen as an outcast by the likes of everyone living in the fictional township of Tromaville. And the thing is, Kaufman himself had quite an ambitious idea, turning an outcast into an unlikely hero. But in 1991, there came a cartoon made for children called Toxic Crusaders. And as we know, like lots of shows that are not quite as well known nowadays as most properties, like Thomas and Friends, Dragon Ball, Ninja Turtles, or even the likes of newer properties like Paw Patrol and The Last Kids on Earth, Toxic Crusaders still does have its own necessary feats. Like the fact that it's basically known as an environmentally conscious series. As during that time in the 1980s and 1990s, lots and lots of shows and figures would come up on the screen talking about anti-drugs, anti-crime, anti-pollution, whatnot. As we know, lots of things jumped on the bandwagon. You have environmentally conscious shows left and right, and anti-drug and anti-crime related things. G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, Swamp Thing, RoboCop, and who could forget Captain Planet? You know, but Toxic Crusaders did seem to be a bit of a different aspect because right from the very get-go, with the first episode, it itself is a bit of an animated remake of the Toxic Avenger itself, the first film from 1980. And Tromaville's own Lloyd Kaufman himself, the original creator of the franchise, in addition to being the founder of Tromaville himself, the studio that was responsible for making the movies and for supervising the cartoon, while it aired in Canada on YTV during that particular period in time. The thing is though, why don't we take ourselves a look at the episodes between all the seasons that came out.
I'm sorry about last night, I called you to apologize, but I'm not sure my voicemail went through.
And I guess with that part covered, let's talk a bit about how the series itself came and went. It basically started off as a pilot in 1990, a bit of a testing phase if you will, before officially beginning its airing in 1991. Each episode starts off with a live action clipping of Lloyd Kaufman himself describing the many events, while being surrounded by all kinds of Toxic Crusaders merchandise that basically came alongside the show itself. So if you thought that the toys of the many properties that existed during this period, like Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtles, and Transformers, if you thought those were awesome, oh man, why don't we take a bit of a look at the toys and products that basically were made alongside these many other properties that existed during this time. All types of shows, movies, and whatnot were made during the 80s and 90s for kids to enjoy, but Toxic Crusaders hopping on the bandwagon based on environmentally conscious people that were around during this time as a means of allowing kids to grow knowing this world might not live too long if such toxic behavior continued to exist. And it's not just talking about the environment, with all the toxic chemicals and waste that came around, creating Toxie himself. Melvin going from an outcast to an unlikely hero, as said before, this is the formula that eventually creates this cartoon, and while it does, in fact, have its own generic bits and pieces, thereby making it what you could consider to be shovelware. It still does seem to be that across all seasons, this was one of a kind. After all, Lloyd Kaufman himself had even explained about the many bits and pieces, details of all kinds that related to how he was able to make the movies possible. Despite very low budgets, and despite some timing constraints, he was able to pull through such incredible feats and challenges that were unlike with most directors back in the day. Even a lot of directors nowadays, like Matt Reeves, Michael Bay, and we definitely can't forget about those legendary bits like the Russos. Well, you know, they can each have themselves a good lesson in knowing the history, that the fact that Lloyd Kaufman went through so much trouble just so he could basically make and release this kind of material in the world. Of course, there were other things that he made as well during that time in particular. But again, going to the episodes though. Each episode starts off with a live action clip starring Lloyd Kaufman himself. He describes the plot itself in a bit of a synoptic manner, almost as if we don't even need to watch the show. We could just listen to whatever he says, describing all the details that are in place, the main point of each episode, and how they came to be. Eventually allowing the fourth episode in the franchise, in the series itself, to be the reason why he in fact intended to create a series that does in fact coincidentally exist amongst the likes of Ninja Turtles, Swamp Thing, and Captain Planet. So when you get down to it, this is another one of those type of shows that existed back in the day. Lots of cartoons existed mainly as a means of spreading all kinds of PSAs and messages to people, almost to the point where it seemed a little overwhelming. But I'm not exactly going to be able to criticize these bits, because this was how the past was back in the day. They tried to make a world a better place. So today, we don't exactly have to tell all these PSAs and the whatnot to people, because we don't see that many people snorting coke, shooting people in the head, or causing the sky to become acid rain. And why is that? Because in the past 40 years, these shows came and went, allowing the next generation of people to be even better than they already were. And so, why else is there so much peace out here in these towns, cities, villages, states, counties, roads, streets, bridges, tunnels, etc.? Everywhere we go, it's hardly ever a likelihood that we could see a crime take place or witness something even more terrifying take place. It's no coincidence, if you ask me. But apart from all that, here throughout the rest of this decade, I don't exactly expect everything to be alright. But knowing that some problems are indeed present at the moment, there will always be a solution for them. And we can't expect it to show up tomorrow. Some of these things take time. Do you ever wonder why the Great Depression was around for so long? Do you ever wonder why the recession stuck around for a few more years after 2008? Do you ever wonder why we had to go through a few years in a pandemic just to get to where we're at today? That's because the problems had to be analyzed very carefully so a solution can eventually be made. And well, when each of these bits and pieces of modern history have come and gone, we are beyond safe nowadays. And there could be a chance that something like this would happen again. But even if it does, we'll be ready for it. We'll be ready for anything at this point. If tomorrow there happens to be a massive drought due to global warming, the whole world starts flooding, a meteor comes down on Earth, or an earthquake or a series of tornadoes and volcanic eruptions take place, if another pandemic shows up, if an enormous riot takes place that's citywide or nationwide, if we ever have anything at all take place, you could say the Toxic Crusaders did its part to attempt to spread the word to people around the world that the future may not always be as bright as we hoped for. And I guess in that regard, let's just be happy. Kaufman did what he did back then, So now we could probably rest in our beds, sleeping safe and sound every single night that we go there, knowing that tomorrow can likely be even better thanks to what's happened in the past. And maybe I'll probably talk a bit more about some other shows like this that were more of the environmentally conscious PSA messaging, but for now, we'll just see what we have left to offer from here on out. So, if you want to see more, go down to my channel to make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.